big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
It's about 2 weeks after the NFL draft. The Bears still have a ton of activity happening at Halas Hall. Rookie minicamps this weekend. That's going to lead right into OTAs, 3 phases of that, mandatory minicamp, and then a long-awaited summer break. We're going to keep the content rolling. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. You can check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at Usayd, Koshul, at _Nick Whalen. Nick, I don't know about you, but things are really picking up steam. I mean, the Bears have a ton of, draft capital that we still have to figure out, talk about. There's obviously that clip of Ravens GM Eric DeCosta going viral where he's talking about how when you trade down, it increases your chances. The draft is luck for the most part. How you doing today? But what's going on?
Yeah. So, I don't know. I think right now it's an exciting time for the Bears. I mean, I saw someone on Twitter rating teams, like power ranking teams, and he had them top 8, and it wasn't a Bears fan. And then you have other people like Warren Sharp had Chicago like 16th. I haven't seen them lower than 18th. So I don't know. Top half of the NFL is good enough for me right now. So I think that's good. But yeah, that clip of Eric DeCosta I thought would be an interesting thing to talk about in here. So basically what the clip was, y'all, and again, Baltimore, I would say one of the best run franchises in the NFL, probably top 3 to 5 at the lowest. Essentially what the clip talked about was, we don't know who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. I mean, Mitch Trubisky versus Patrick Mahomes, right? I mean, you just go down the list. Like, we don't know who's going to make it, who's not. And some of that isn't even just the player. Some of that's the coaches developing the player, the organization, having things to support the players. Like, there's a lot of layers to this. Luck, with injuries, luck with they don't have off the field issues, or family members like Tariq Cohen, if you guys remember, his family members were like, you made it to the league? All right, let's start distributing money. There's lots of parts to it, but essentially trading down is a plus EV move because you don't know if the guy that they're trading up for is going to hit. So if you can get 2 chances for their 1, or even talking about trading up is very cost prohibitive for the same reason. So I thought it was interesting in terms of to visit back on that, because even and I think a lot of Bears Twitter, Bears fans, wanted the Bears to trade for Ashton Genty. And looking at that now and then thinking overall, and we'll go over the trades. I wrote those down the Bears made. It looked like Ryan Poles is getting more savvy with acquiring more picks, getting more chances, which essentially is going to help the Bears more long-term.
So first off, let me just say this. I was in the camp of please try not to trade up, if I remember correctly. I mean, we had a ton of talk throughout draft season. But this was, and by the way, with this draft in the context of 2025, at number 10, I was like, trade down because you're going to need more picks. Yep. But which they ultimately ended up doing, by the way, which means that the Bear Report, which is a credentialed media outlet, I would tend to think that you and I know a thing or two before it's going to happen. All right. But it is, so the whole trade down thing is really interesting. First off, if you go back to the first draft that Poles had with the franchise in 2022, remember the flurry of trades that he had and how it was such a different contrast in terms of philosophy from what Ryan Pace had done, because Ryan Pace was always, hey, let's trade up. There's the rumors that he was trying to trade up for Marcus Mariota and Carson Wentz in back-to-back years. Obviously, one of the years he moved up for Leonard Floyd, and then all of a sudden here comes Ryan Poles, who was like, okay, we're going to explore a trade up. Like, they obviously explored trading up for Rome Odunze last year. We're going to explore trading up for Ashton Genty this year. But what we're also going to go ahead and do is explore more so trading down. Because, number one, if we have to trade up to get our guy, then that guy's probably not our guy. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is incredibly noteworthy is the fact that when we look at where the Bears are at right now, it's a very healthy situation for this team looking into next year, where trading up is an option when you have 8 draft picks in 2026. But trading down, considering how expensive your roster is going to go ahead and get, even with the salary cap jumping up, where you're not going to have as much money to spend. There are certain extensions like a Joe Thuney one that we're going to talk about in a few minutes here that are going to make this roster a little bit more expensive, which is then going to funnel back into the argument of you need more draft capital than you probably think.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's cost control, and rookies are the cheapest ones, y'all. I mean, the vet minimum is over $1 million now, but that's not what it is for rookies. So, no, that's a good point. And there was a huge shift with that, right? Like even the Rams, right? Think of what the Rams did in this draft. The Rams traded back with Atlanta. They got that extra one, and they got a second round pick just for moving down in the first round. And I think they got more than that. And remember, the Rams not too long ago were, blank them picks, right? Like they didn't need those draft picks. And now they've restocked their team with Jared Verse, with Braden Fisk. I mean, they have Byron Young, I think, is on their other DN. Like they have retooled their team, Puka Nacua, with draft picks. So I think teams are getting more savvy and more smart with it. But I'm glad that Ryan Poles is on the good side of it versus the other side. And speaking to that, I have the 3 trades here written down. And I know, because we're going to talk about the day 3 guys in this, y'all. I know people are down with Ruben Hippolyte, but I think this might soften the blow a little bit. So the first trade they made, again, lots of trades with Buffalo, y'all. They gave up 41, 72, and 240 for 56, 62, and 109. So they went down from 41 to 56, so 15 picks. They went up 10 picks from 62 to 72. And they went up from 109 to 240. And in terms of the draft trade charts, et cetera, Chicago lost on that deal. And I even said that as we were talking about, with episodes leading up to the draft, I was okay with Chicago trading down, even if they lost value. But here's the other part of this trade, y'all, is that 109 was Chicago's original pick. They got traded to Buffalo. They got traded back to Chicago. They got traded back to Buffalo because Buffalo is one that traded up with them again. And Chicago got 132 and 169. So really that trade, if you combine those two, Chicago got 4 picks and gave up 4, but they went up from 240 to 169. They went up from 72 to 62, and they gave up, what would this be? 132. They went down from 109 and went down from 41 to 56. So, like in the end, they're controlling that, but they're increasing their potential value by moving up. And then the last trade was they went from 148 with the Rams to get 195, and then they got a 2026 fourth. So when you look at the Ruben Hippolyte and the Zay Frasier, et cetera, like all the guys they're going to get on day 3 here, we're going to talk about, just realize that was possible because of the trade downs. Without that happening, they were not going to get that guy. They were going to have, what was it? They were going to have a 5th round pick and 2 7th round picks, and that was it. But they acquired more draft capital to get more chances with this draft class.
And to me, so part of this entire conversation starts with, what do you consider to be like a quote unquote successful hit rate for some of these mid-round picks? Obviously, you're hoping that, most of your first 3 in this draft class have to hit. Now, to me, the best trade that the Bears made in this one, which is also going back to what you and I said pre-draft in terms of, okay, it makes sense for this team to trade down with one of the 2 second-round picks. To trade up, you would have had to give 39 up in some deal. But it makes sense to trade down simply because, number one, you couldn't guarantee that any of the running backs were going to be there. Number 2, I don't think anyone is complaining, because when we go back and we look at some of these deals in 3 years' time, what is going to end up happening, I think, is that there's going to be this sort of, oh, well, Ozzie Trapilo ended up hitting, so that was a really smart trade down. Because the Bears would not have 56 and 62 if you don't trade out of 41 overall. And then obviously you're not going to have some of those day 3 picks if you don't trade down in the 4th round as well. And quite frankly, we look at the draft board in general, this was a very thin draft class to where you, as a GM, or even, me sitting there, I felt quote unquote comfortable with what the Bears were doing, because I was just like, some of these picks are going to hit, some of these are not going to hit, but I would love it if they address a certain position right now.
Oh, 100%. And I get more, and we're gonna have a future episode on this, y'all, but I get more comfortable when I look at who went where, and like at 41 was a little bit of a dead man's like area, you know what I mean? And like they got TJ Sanders is who Buffalo took, but it was like Mason Taylor, Alfred Collins, and then it was Ezeraku in the DN for Ohio State, Terrence Ferguson. Like they could have taken one of those guys, but like I didn't think that they were that much better than, get improving your overall draft class from trading down. So again, I think I want to hit home this message, because if Eric DeCosta is talking about how trading down is the plus EV move and what you should be doing to increase your odds and chances, and again, like even if you're moving up draft picks from later on, that helps you out too. And Ryan Poles is doing it. Y'all need to start giving Ryan Poles, some of his praise, because I feel like we have a lot of, oh well, look at how Ryan Poles messed up and Chase Claypool or Nate Davis, etc. It's like, Howie Roseman drafted Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. Like GMs are not going to bat 1,000. They're not, but they need to keep getting at bats, and that's what this is. So I think we need to give Ryan Poles a little bit more praise for the moves that he's making to make this roster better.
And I will say, a lot of people, because that was the 2020 draft class, I'm sure a lot of people look back at it and say, hey, Justin Jefferson should probably be a top 3, even top 5 selection. I mean, I don't think anyone is necessarily going to go back and say that. Or if you were to put the two side by side, there would definitely be a conversation of, hey, if you're in the top 10, you've got, and I understand Jamar Chase went and got drafted in 2021, but if you take Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase inside the top 5, again, both LSU teammates, I mean, who would you rather have? Like, that's a very legitimate question.
Well, and sorry, real quick, one more thing, y'all, is a lot of times we'd like to talk about the Bryce Young trade and how awesome it was for Chicago. Well, that's proof right there of you traded down, you got a ton of capital, and you just filled up. I mean, you got a third of your team. I feel like a third of your starters from just this trade. Maybe that's too many, but that's just off the top of my head. Like I'm thinking you got a huge chunk of assets from one trade, and so that just proves, I think, the trading down. And again, we don't know. I am going to assume Caleb Williams will have a better career than Bryce Young, but we didn't know that at the time. Without that trade down, Caleb Williams is not on this team, y'all. We're rolling with Justin Fields, and we're still hopefully supporting him, but then we got to get a receiver because we didn't get DJ Moore. Like, think of what would have happened if Poles is like, no, we're not going to trade down here. We're gonna take whomever. So, well, actually, maybe he would have taken Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and that would have been the starter. But either way, they would have had less support. So that's the whole thing behind this. That if you can see that trade and be like, wow, look how much better we got, you should probably support other trade downs of the Bears and other teams and how that's going to help your team more in the future.
And we look at some of these trade downs. I mean, living in the moment, but projecting in the future. Let's just say the Bears trade down. Well, looking at some of the trade downs the Bears have made right now. I mean, you landed Ozzie Trapilo and you landed Shamar Turner. What happens if those two guys hit? Then you're talking about two players on 4-year contracts, very cheap 4-year deals for the foreseeable future that are going to continue being impact players. You talk about Ruben Hippolyte also being a possible hit as well. And I think that, first of all, getting into some of these day 3 picks here, the conversation around Ruben Hippolyte needs to come to a halt, in my opinion. Because first of all, when a guy's not a fan favorite, there's usually a lot of pessimism that tends to start surfacing on Twitter in terms of, or any social media in terms of, hey, why did you take this guy, blah, 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 like what's up with so-and-so? And I understand that part of that is warranted, but also when we talked to Francis St. Paul at Halas a couple weeks ago, one of the big things that he said was the fact that Ruben Hippolyte had like 50-something starts, I think it was, during his time in Maryland. So the Bears didn't draft him just because they wanted to beef up the linebacker room or because linebacker was a need. They clearly saw a day 3 pick with a ton of starting experience that they know is going to translate into him becoming a solid contributor on special teams, which with his speed, I should mention, I mean, when we talk about just simple punt formations, your 2 gunners on the outside always have to be a receiver or a defensive back. Got it? Like, those are your 2 gunners on the outside. They have to be the fastest guys on the team because they can't lose outside contain. When you talk about some of the guys in the middle, you obviously have your linemen, but your linebackers too that are kind of on that second level, they need to be pretty freaking quick as well. And honestly, like, if we look at it, like, the Bears' special teams last year, it wasn't necessarily the worst. It wasn't the best either, but it was a unit that I look at and I'm like, there are certain improvements that could have been made had this team simply been faster in the middle.
Oh, yeah. And that's the one thing is like, once you get out of the second round of the NFL draft, you have to start taking special teams into this. I know people are always thinking like starters, right? But special teams is a significant part of the team. It's a part of being active on the game day roster. And that's how coaches think. They think of roles for players. They're not thinking of superstars. Like, that's why fast guys get drafted at receiver because, like, okay, he's going to fit a role in this offense. He's not going to get targeted the most, etc. So you're talking about special teams with Ruben Hippolyte, and linebackers make the most tackles on the team. So he's going to make a lot of tackles on special teams, as well as think of who could make this team. They needed a linebacker that they could develop with Noah Sewell, right, to maybe backfill if they move on from Tremaine Edmonds after next year. So, I mean, he is talked poorly about all the time, and I think people are giving him no chance. He's a guy with a lot of starts. As we know, he's a very good athlete. The other thing is this, man, out of high school, he was a 4-star prospect. He was a top 25 linebacker coming out of high school. You're telling me that Dennis Allen and Ben Johnson have no idea what they're doing? They're just randomly that guy's fast. We're just going to draft him. Like, they obviously see something and they want to develop. And I say Dennis Allen has developed some really good linebackers with the Saints as well. So maybe we should give him a little bit of, patience. Like, I think we're trusting Ben Johnson with some draft picks. We need to trust Dennis Allen with some as well.
And on that whole idea, I mean, Ruben Hippolyte's a name that some of it is to be determined. You're hoping that he comes in and starts to push some of these guys like a Noah Sewell. But it's also very noteworthy to me that when we examine where the Bears are at, that some of it, I think, generally does come down to the fact that it's like some of these were incredibly surprising picks for some people. Like, obviously, people weren't happy that Jack Sanborn ended up signing with Dallas, and the Bears never really seemed to make him a serious offer. Well, again, part of this goes back to what we said a couple weeks ago. Like, the Bears are looking for players that fit what Ben Johnson's trying to do on offense and then what Dennis Allen's trying to do on defense. The traditional issue with this franchise has always been the fact that it's like, hey, so new head coach, new coaching staff comes in, new offensive and defensive coordinator. Well, guess what? We're going to make you try to figure it out with the previous regime sort of pieces, right? You're going to have to figure this out with a linebacker that doesn't fit your system. You're going to have to run a 3-4 scheme with 4-3 players. You're going to have to run a 4-3 with 3-4 players and vice versa and all that. And so it's just this mess that like doesn't work. Well, now the Bears are getting to a point where they're actually drafting players that will fit the mold of what this coaching staff is trying to do, which is, quite frankly, to me, how you go about continuing to move the franchise forward.
Yeah, and on that, actually, I was just going through and looking at the RAS of Noah Sewell versus Ruben Hippolyte. And I'm trying to remember, Noah Sewell was 4th, 5th round pick himself in that range. So you're just looking and you're comparing both of these guys. And it's been a couple of years now, 2023 draft of Noah Sewell, and we haven't really seen a lot of good dividends from that. And in every athletic area, in terms of 40-yard dash, 10-yard split, short shuttle, 3-cone, vertical broad jump, Ruben Hippolyte is either equal or better than Noah Sewell in all of those categories. Noah Sewell is taller, heavier, and had more bench press reps. Also a bigger hand size. So a bigger guy. But as you're talking about, maybe they are shifting this, right? We already see the shift in, it looks like anyway, the interior D tackles, as we talked about on the last episode, are maybe quicker, more gap penetrators versus these bigger guys that are going to, potentially take up two blockers. We're not a two gapping defense, never have or haven't been in a while. But maybe we're going to be shooting gaps more. So maybe this is what the new interior is going to look like: is these guys that can blitz and shoot gaps and tackle ball carriers.
And again, on that note, I mean, that's going to be the defensive line here, which we talked about Shamar Turner last episode, but it's also, and the last two episodes, but it's also going to be very important for the Bears to kind of figure out how that front four and really the front seven mirrors what that secondary is going to go ahead and do. Because Zay Frasier, and we found out it's pronounced Zay, it's not Zay, it's Zay Frasier. So Zay Frasier is this incredibly interesting player, because when they originally made the pick, I was like, all right, corner is not the biggest need for the Bears right now, but knowing that this team was letting the board fall to them, it just so happened that the board fell in a way where Zay Frasier was going to be the top rated prospect on their board. Now, obviously, Ryan Poles had kind of said that Al Harris, the cornerbacks coach, texted him all about Zay Frasier, but part of me also wants to think that the Bears saw a couple things. Number one, they didn't really care what school he was from, but they saw a really damn good athlete. They saw a player with the traits needed to possibly take another step forward if that's, again, what this franchise was going to be all about and what this franchise was going to go ahead and envision. And then the third thing is they saw a player that they felt like could come in and push guys like Tyreek Stevenson and Terrell Smith. Now, I'm not saying that, a fifth-round corner should be starting for the Bears next year, but if we look at Tyreek Stevenson, right, there is a couple things to sort of look at here. Like, Tyreek Stevenson's a player that obviously, he's 6 feet, he's got 33-inch arms almost, and just under 10-inch hands. Whereas you get Zay Frasier's 6'3", is 186 pounds, okay? And obviously, to Ryan Pohl's point about, like, hey, we go years back when watching some of these players, like, Zay Frasier played at Southern Illinois University for a year. So that means the Bears were clearly on the phone with someone in the Southern Illinois campus trying to get as much intel on him as they could to get an idea whether or not he's a serious fit.
The fun thing that I like to look at this is Al Harris, new DB's coach in Chicago, told Ryan Poles, like, hey, Zay Frasier, this is the guy that I like his film. And as I'm looking over here, one of the guys, small school guy that Al Harris developed in Dallas, 5th round pick, 6 foot, 197, 32-inch arms. So shorter, heavier, shorter arms, 4.4, 8.4 yard dash. So a lot slower than Frasier. Deron Bland. Maybe you guys have heard of him. He's a pretty good corner in Dallas. Led the NFL interceptions one year, first team All-Pro 2023, etc. 5th round pick. He was at Sac State for 3 years and Fresno State for a year. So, like, not a big school guy. So yeah, Zay Frasier, y'all, I mean, is, I think, a perfect guy for them to take. 5th round, again, just like Ruben Hippolyte, like, special teams probably for sure, right? I mean, if you run a 4.36, you're going to be maybe one of the gunners you're talking about, Usayd. But hey, who knows? He's an older rookie. But if this is the kind of guy that Al Harris wants, let's look at some of the measurables, because this part is the fun part. He's just under 6'3", which is the 95th percentile for corners. I'm going to use percentiles. I think that might help a little bit. He's 95th percentile in wingspan, 90th percentile in arm length, 94th percentile in 40-yard dash, 77th in broad jump, 60th in vertical, like, athletic dude. Now, again, the 3-cone short shuttle, those are like in the 30s, 40s. So again, tougher when you're taller to move your hips. No kidding, right? That's why when people talk about, like, Ted McMillan, like, he doesn't run routes good. He's tall, y'all. Like, you don't run routes like you're, like the short guys do when you're 6'4", 6'5". The other thing that's interesting about Frasier, y'all, is he's thin. He's 186, so he's 14th percentile. And I don't know if you know this, Usayd, He's got the baby hands, man. 8.25-inch hand size, second percentile. But again, if Al Harris watched his film, put him on his radar in February for Ryan Poles, in the 5th round, they want to take a chance on a guy that's big, long, and fast. Perfect gamble at this part of the draft.
And to be clear, it's a very sort of polarizing thing here for the Bears on this day 3, because some people are going to sit there and be like, well, they should have taken Dylan Sampson, for example. I mean, it's hard to go ahead and take a player that's not on the board, first off. But moving away from Zay Frasier, Luke Newman was also a bit of...
Sorry, one quick. Sorry to interrupt here. This, again, y'all, this was possible because of the trade down with Buffalo. So they would have had 109, which was Deion Walker, Ty Robinson, CJ West, Trevor Etienne. That was the guys just after that range. And they got Hippolyte and Frasier just from that trade down. So just people thinking of how do we capitalize? We got 2 chances just from that one pick.
And I mean, okay, so you mentioned Deion Walker. Just to be clear here, so I've been doing homework on I do homework on the upcoming draft class starting in May. Got it? Which is why I just dropped my 2026 mock draft for the Bears, which is live on the Bear Report website. Todd McShay's mock draft has the Bears in 2026 taking Jeremiah Love over Keldrick Fault. If that is the case, I'm going to be royally pissed off, dude. And the reason being is because Keldrick Falk is the next coming of a better version of Trey Hendrickson, in my opinion. Now, all that stuff we will get to later on. But here is, I think, the big thing to me is that the needs that the Bears had to address in terms of some of the positions, they kind of did that on day 3. It gets very, I guess, polarizing when we look at the progression of these draft picks from one year to the next year. And the reason being is simply because I don't think people realize, like, if you Googled 2025 mock drafts at this time last year, all the way up until, I want to say, probably November, December-ish, Deion Walker was being talked about a first-round pick. Now, there are 2 things here to understand. 50% of this is that something that is happening in the summer, late spring, early summer for the next draft class, like May, June, July, August, September, October, you can't really put a ton of stock into, right? Obviously, some of these guys are going to be on our watch list and whatnot. Like Deion Walker was on my watch list. I was like, all right, if he for sure is a first round pick and the Bears are picking in the middle of the first round, maybe he is a player that the Bears go ahead and choose. But to see a guy go from first round projections down to basically 4th, 5th round projections just shows you how fluid the draft process is and how much things can change. Whereas like last year at this time, guess what? There were 3 Texas A&M players going in the first round. Zay Frasier wasn't even on a lot of people's boards. Ashton Genty was nowhere to be found, which next year, by the way, I think that all you need to keep an eye on another Tulane running back in the 2nd round, Mekhi Hughes. I think that when the Bears draft a running back a workhorse running back in the 2nd round, that's going to be a multi-year starter. The last time that happened was a Tulane running back by the name of Matt Forte. Next year, it's going to be Mekhi Hughes. Just saying,
dude. I was huge on Matt Forte coming out, so that's you're just preaching to the choir here. So the next pick and 6th round pick acquired from the Rams. This is another trade down, y'all. This is the trade down where they got the extra 4th next year. Is Luke Newman, and I have to be honest, man. When this came out, I was rooting Luke Newman, Usayd. I was like, yeah, he's quick, he's athletic. I'm like, he's got short arms, 31-inch arms. His wingspan was also very small. I was like, but did you watch film of this guy? Like, he's exciting. Like he's quick. He can get up to the 2nd level. He can reach block really well. He's got really good feet. He's active. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, for pick 195 and wanting, again, another athletic guy in the interior, which we were completely wrong, or I was wrong, Usayd. I was like, Ben Johnson's going to come over. He's going to get those big uglies in the middle. we're going to run duo with these big guys and we're going to get power. And it's like, dude, we are going so athletic. And I mean, this is more testament to that, like outside zone all day, man. We are going to be reach blocking and going to the edge all the time. And not just edge, y'all. When you start doing that, there's massive cutback lanes too. So it's not just going to be edge. They're going to press and then they're going to cut back. And I think Luke Newman is a great backup. It might mean the end of Doug Kramer in Chicago, though.
Which is, I know some people are going to be like, oh, Hinsdale Central kid / Illini kid. Well, first off, I think the big thing to understand with Doug is that, I mean, number one, he's never really healthy. Number two, there's never really a true role that they carved out for him because he was never healthy. And then the third thing is that at some point, you have to start cutting bait with players that are not getting the job done. Now, Doug Kramer is going to be here through the end of August. The Bears are going to give him a legitimate shot to kind of make this roster and all that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he should be on the 53 come the start of the season, which, again, I mean, I think September 1st is when all the roster cuts and all that are due. But the other big thing I think with Luke Newman is that from some of the intel I get from people at Holy Cross, which one of my quarterbacks was actually a starter with Luke Newman for a couple of years over at Holy Cross, so I get really good intel. Like, you hear nothing but good things about Luke in terms of his ability to be a winner, his ability to just go out there, be the type of player that's going to do whatever is needed to help this team win, and then obviously, his ability to make sure that guys are going ahead and getting their job done. Now, to be clear, some people are going to be like, oh, well, why exactly did he start off at Holy Cross and transfer to a bigger school? I mean, we talked to Luke, and a lot of times when these guys are transferring, it's not because they don't fit or something. A lot of times it just comes down to the fact that in the transfer portal, there is that opportunity to be closer to home. There is that opportunity to go ahead and to have a chance to really be a player that can go from playing at a smaller D2, D3 school to basically having a couple of years of film and then playing at a much bigger school where the competition is much bigger. Because some of these guys are not necessarily the biggest, fastest, or strongest coming out of high school, according to the full-on recruiting classes, right? So they go to some of these smaller schools, and Nick, you know this better than I do. They go to some of these smaller schools, and then they eventually take that jump to a much bigger school in the process, which does real well for their competition. Like, okay, Luke Newman, center, Michigan State. Got it? Or I should say interior offensive lineman, Michigan State. If he were to stay at Holy Cross, he wouldn't have even got drafted. He'd just be an undrafted free agent at that point.
Yeah, probably. And the thing is, like, when you look at, okay, you do well at Holy Cross, how you can do at Michigan State? And when you do well there and you do better at the Senior Bowl, then you're getting on more and more lists and you're rising up charts. I mean, that's like with anything. He's going from Michigan State to the NFL. How are you going to do? Like, some guys can hack it and some guys can't. So, yeah, I don't fault anyone for wanting more competition and seeing how they're going to do and challenge themselves. As you're talking about, the more repetitions that you get, the better some players get, and some players stay the same. And that's why some of these small school guys can rise up. Speaking of, not really small school, but not a powerhouse, Kyle Manungai, Rutgers. And dude, just looking back at Rutgers football, you got Greg Schiano over there, and I'm like, man, I remember the Ray Rice days. They had Kenny Britt. I mean, they had Rutgers rolling a long time ago, y'all. And, Schiano didn't work out too well at Tampa Bay in the NFL, and then bounced around a bit. He's back at Rutgers. He's trying, but we got to talk about just some of his measurables. Okay. I know people hate to talk about this because it's not good with him. Okay. He's fairly small. Okay. In terms of he's 5'8.25", he's 211. So I get that in terms of like your BMI, like you're going to be low to the ground and have some leverage there. Wingspan 17th percentile, arm length 3rd percentile, hand size 26th percentile. He's a little dude. Okay, y'all, little guy. 40-yard dash, 10-yard split vertical, broad jump. None of that stuff is great. You look at his RAS, 4.03 RAS. I'm going to wait for my judgment on this. I'm just curious. What did you think of his film when you watched him?
I saw a player that is, if I were to give him a nickname, it'd kind of be the human fire hydrant, I feel like. Because you're getting a player that is has a very strong lower body in terms of, you definitely, I think, in pass protection see the anchor. You do see a incredibly hard runner as well. I feel like he's got good bursts, but he doesn't have this sort of great burst. But Manungai is going to be the type of player where, if you remember Travion Williams, I think it was, who was at A&M, I think, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, he was A&M. Yep.
Yeah, that's Kyle Manungai to me all over again, in terms of, he's never going to be this crazy damn good workhorse player. He's never going to be the type of player that is, the best of the bunch, but he can be really serviceable. Some people are going to look at him and say, David Montgomery. I'm going to look at him and say he's not a David Montgomery. He's not a Jahmyr Gibbs either. He's far from any of those guys. This isn't to depreciate him by any means, but I feel like he is if you took the running ability if you took the hard running ability plus the physicality and the grit of a Roshan Johnson, and you meshed it together with the burst as well as some of the home run hitting ability of a Khalil Herbert, you put those two together, that is Kyle Manungai right there.
Yeah, and people aren't going to like this, y'all. So if you're a huge Manungai fan, maybe this is time to mute the podcast for a little bit. Go forward 5 minutes, okay? I just wasn't a big fan of the film. I'm all for, I think he's more of like a try hard guy, and I'm okay with that. Like, you need guys like that, special teams, maybe some certain packages he'll be in there. But I don't see this guy as like a full-time starter for the Bears. I don't see him as, I like you're talking about, like, I don't see a lot of bursts. Like, I see there's openings, and his contact balance is pretty good at times. But man, like the burst just isn't there. I mean, his 10-yard split is 1.62, which is, bottom 50 percentile. And the cutting and all that kind of stuff. I don't see a ton of things there. As you're talking about pass protector, good, but also that shortness helps him there because he's short and stocky, so he can help and get good leverage in pass pro. I just see him as a guy who, if there's an injury to a back, he could be a guy that could help out and take 50% of the load for a game or two, or he can come in and be that change of pace. But like a lot of times with backs, you get this late, they got to be contribute on special teams. So you're hoping, I think he's going to contribute there, at least some. But I know some people are way more hyped about him than me. I don't see him as an answer. I see him as probably a career backup, likely a third string guy.
Yeah, it's a very, I guess, we're going to wonder what happens with Manungai, but a couple things here. So first off, Manungai's background is interesting, right? And I am a New Jersey, New York guy originally. Rutgers runs in the family, so dad, couple uncles, some cousins as well kind of went there. Obviously Rutgers is not one of those powerhouse Big Ten programs. It's never, to me, going to be some of these powerhouse Big Ten programs, especially with a lot of the changes in the Big Ten that have taken place. But like, Manungai went to Don Bosco Prep, okay? And if there's one thing I know about Bergen County in New Jersey, if there's one thing I know about Don Bosco Prep, it's that Don Bosco Prep tends to churn out really damn good football players year in and year out. So for a player like Manungai, like, had he not gone to Don Bosco Prep, you're probably talking about a guy that isn't playing football at Rutgers. You're probably talking about a guy that is not going to go ahead and is not going to be this 7th round pick and end up being, a starter. Now with the Bears, the tough part, I think, with the running back room, as we start to kind of wrap up here, is the fact that our last episode, we discussed whether or not the Bears should add a veteran running back. Part of me also thinks, though, that like maybe the Bears want to let Manungai kind of handle things early on, see what he does, and then see whether or not there's a veteran that's worth bringing in. Like, this could very well be the Bears signaling, hey, so we're not going to sign a Nick Chubb or a Trey Sermon, for example, but we are going to go ahead and we are going to kind of let Manungai come in, compete with Roshan Johnson as well as DeAndre Swift, and then we'll go from there in terms of deciding, do we feel good about the running back room, or do we want to add to this at some point?
Well, I think the other part of that is when you're Nick Chubb, when you're J.K. Dobbins, when you're any veteran, you don't sign right now. You don't want to go through the dog days of summer. You sign when camp starts. You sign partway through camp. You get out of all that stuff. That's what I think a lot of veterans at this point are going to do. They maybe they're waiting to see if an injury happens. As we're talking about, seeing if some young guys don't step up. But that's good. This is good for Manungai that he can have reps in mini camp and OTAs early in camp, all that kind of stuff. You can see what you have there. We also need to see what they want from Roshan Johnson. They talked about this on the interview where they felt like he was misused last year. So I think there's a lot of hope for what's on the Bears roster, but also there's other guys that they could sign to help out with edge, with safety, etc. I mean, if you're talking about D end, I know people are mad they didn't draft one highly if Turner does not kick out. Za'Darius Smith, y'all, needs to complete his he's the last infinity stone to play for every NFC North team. He's a free agent. He's a big DN, and he's out there. So, there's guys that you could sign if you're like, hey, I don't want to spend $3 to $5 million on Nick Chubb. Instead, I want to have another position. So that's certainly something to think of. One thing quick before we talk about Joe Thuney, y'all, is we want to start doing some question and answer podcasts / streams. Depends on how you guys absorb our content. If you guys are podcast only, reach out to Usayd or me on Twitter. Just message us and answer and put in your questions, and we'll again kind of put them in that episode if we can. It depends on how many that we get. The other thing, if you watch us on YouTube, underneath our YouTube, different pods that we have, put in your comments the questions that you want. So we'll try and get as many of those answered as we can. If we can for those episodes, I think it would be fun. We potentially could go live as well. So you guys can interact with us, answer questions once we're through those. Hopefully we get a lot of good Bears content done that way. So that's just something that we're going to be happening towards the end of the month.
Yeah, definitely keep all that in mind. Publisher Zach Pearson just did a really good interview with one of the Mizzou beat writers for the 247 Sports Network on Luther Burden. And there is a lot of really good stuff in there. It's about a 25 to 28 minute episode. So for sure, on your morning commutes or whenever you're walking the dog and all that, go ahead, check that out. I mean, let's take a few minutes here though to discuss Joe Thuney. So there's a lot of chatter on Bears Twitter about Joe Thuney extension coming. Ryan Poles kind of talked about how it's a priority for the Bears to get that done after the draft. The draft's now in the rearview mirror. Realistically, when do the Bears make it happen? I mean, I could totally see them deciding to say, the Joe Thuney extension is great, but we're going to want to go ahead and wrap up our draft class first before we kick into contract talks with him. So that's definitely one of those where I totally see a 1 to 2 year extension happening. I for sure would say a 2-year extension. It's just a matter of when at this point and not if for me.
Yeah, and I think the draft class really cemented that this is going to happen, because while Ozzie could play inside, he's likely a tackle. I don't see Kranamagaji playing inside with his arm length. Braxton Jones does not have the mass to play inside. So what are they going to do? So to me, in my opinion, it has to be at least a 1-year extension, Usayd. And looking at Thuney here, he turns 33 in November. And I know people are like, oh man, he's getting old. I saw some of those comments. It's like, why are we extending guys before they've played for the Bears to see if they're good? The people have that. It's like, do you know Joe Thuney? He is a All-Pro, first team All-Pro each of the last 2 years. The year before that, he was second team All-Pro. And a couple years before that, he was a second team All-Pro. 3 years in a row, y'all, he was a first or second team All-Pro before coming to Chicago. Yeah, I'm going to extend that guy. I'm going to take the chance that that's going to keep happening. Or, even if he goes down a little bit, Usayd, that's still Pro Bowl level for a couple of years. Now, I don't want to extend him 3 years. My guess is if this is a 2-year extension, Usayd, it's going to be 2025, 2026 likely guaranteed money, and then 2027 is going to be up in the air.
Exactly. It is definitely going to be something to watch. I would definitely say this, though, a 1-year guaranteed extension for 2026. I don't necessarily see, and then, another one where 2027 is not necessarily a guaranteed 2027, again, not a guaranteed year. So it's going to be very interesting to go ahead and see what direction the Bears ultimately kind of go in here, especially when it comes to extending Joe Thuney, which again, this is a topic that, with the draft still fresh in the back of our heads, we wanted to kind of focus on that, but we'll get more into the Joe Thuney stuff and how the markets kind of continue to fluctuate up and down, what it could potentially look like for Joe Thuney as he kind of approaches his mid-30s and what will likely be his last major payday. Before we get out of here, a couple things to go ahead and plug. Make sure that you check us out on Twitter at Halas, at Usayd, Koshul, at _ Nick Whalen. It's like Nick said, make sure that you are sending us a DM on Twitter, commenting under the YouTube videos, or just reaching out to us on the 247 Sports website on bearreport.com about any mailbag questions that you may have. We're obviously going to go ahead and try to get as many of those out as we can. Check Nick and I on Twitter at _ Nick and at Usayd Koshul. We're going to be back Thursday with another really fun episode where we have no idea what we're going to talk about, but it'll be some really good content. So bear down, and until then, stay safe. Enjoy this mini heat wave that's hitting Chicago at this point.